And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Awesemo Daytona 500 Strategy Show. My name is Phil. You follow me, of course, at RaceSheets DFS. I am joined by Chris Pinnell. You follow him on Twitter at ChrisPinnell16. And behind the glass, answering the phone calls and handling the switchboard is our man, Mike Lawrence. Chris, how are you doing this afternoon?
Doing fantastic. Looking forward to a great race weekend. Nice to be here, Phil.
Yeah, this is the granddaddy of them all. This is the biggest race of the season. It's basically if you're new to NASCAR, think of it this way. It's almost as if the NFL decided, let's kick off the season instead of with the Hall of Fame game, let's do it with the Super Bowl. So that's where we're at. This is the biggest race. We don't know what the payouts are anymore because NASCAR has put a zipper on the on what exactly the payouts are. But believe me, these are going to be the biggest payouts for these drivers all year. This will come with the most prestige. Simply, if you can win this race, it will add to your lore as a driver. It will go a long way in cementing your place in making the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Like this is the race that means everything to every NASCAR Cup Series driver. Once you get into the series, if you have a shot at winning this race, it's what means everything. And for us DFS players, it has a lot of meaning to us, especially now that DraftKings is awarding $1 million tomorrow. And that's probably why a lot of you are joining us, because you're trying to figure out, how am I going to win the $1 million GPP tomorrow on DraftKings? So we're going to get into plenty of these different topics. The first thing that I want to hit up on, Chris, is we entered Thursday night with the duels with a couple of like 6 different open drivers, and a couple of them got eliminated. We lost Timmy Hill, and we also lost JJ Yaley. Both were driving for Motorsports Business Management. So that leaves us with our 4 different open drivers. Just to talk about these different drivers, how are you feeling about the prospects of Gragson, Villeneuve, Gralla, and I'm missing Greg Biffle? How are you feeling about these four guys?
So out of those 4, there's 2 I'm actually pretty interested. One would be Casgrella and then Noah Gragson, mainly just because, with Noah Gragson, the 62 car, we've seen success with that car in the past here. At super speedways, Brendan Gaughan is always complete money every single time we're at a super speedway. I think like at one point, like 5 out of the past 6 optimal lineups, he was in it at Daytona or Talladega. Not that they're the same driver or anything, but still, starting all the way back in 39th place. Not that price matters too much. He's dirt cheap. He should be able to be a fine cash play and still great in tournaments, even though he will carry some pretty high ownership. And then I already mentioned with Casgrella, it was kind of concerning that he did not look that great in the dual race. But if he can just stay alive and avoid carnage, it'll be hard for him to not improve upon his starting position.
Yeah. Before we get any further, because there are a few more topics that we're going to hit on before we transition into actually talking about the different drivers, I want to give everybody that reminder. Lofty always says it. We need the likes, we need the subscribes. If you're not already doing so, hit that bell. We have to fight the algorithm. If you don't understand the way that YouTube works, everything exists in such a small microcosm that if you don't immediately hit the ground running, then it has the tendency to fall immediately on its face. And with DFS information being such short impact and losing it,
Gotcha. So it looks like we lost Phil for a second. I know he was mentioning leaving like, subscribe. That really does help us out quite a bit. Now, one thing we did want to mention, me and Phil were talking about in pre-show, was that DraftKings did actually open up a new contest. I think we got Phil back. I don't know if you want to mention about the new contest that DraftKings happened to post last night, I believe.
Yeah, for whatever reasons, DraftKings decided, hey, we're going to open up a new slate with much smaller prize pools, and it's going to be a post-qualifying slate, and it looks like they didn't really adjust salaries that much. You and me were talking pre-show that if you're going to do this sort of contest, then you adjust the drivers that are starting in the back, you make them more expensive, and the drivers that are starting up the front that can only really make their hay via laps led points, you make them much cheaper. But it really looks like they didn't. So I don't understand why they're doing this. But hey, it's extra rake for DraftKings.
Right. And really, we were talking about it, and they didn't really affect the pricing whatsoever. Like, they made Kyle Larson more expensive, even though he's theoretically the worst play on the slate, just from a number standpoint. They didn't move Austin Dillon up much. Erik Jones hasn't moved. So really, for the most part, I'm not sure why they did it, but if you want to play it, it is there. But for the most part, we'll be focusing on just the main slate that they posted earlier in the week.
Right. Okay, let's start getting into our drivers. If you are following along at home, we are going 1 through 40 here in the grid. So, we're going to be basically going from the drivers that are probably going to be seeing the least amount of ownership all the way down to the bottom, the guys that for the religious followers of Stack the Back, the guys that are going to be seeing the most ownership. So starting first, we've got Kyle Larson, Alex Bowman in second, Brad Keselowski in third, Chris Buescher in fourth, Austin Cindric in fifth, Michael McDowell in sixth, Ryan Blaney seventh, Harrison Burton eighth, Chase Briscoe ninth, and then Kyle Busch in 10th. What are your initial thoughts? Because obviously these are drivers that were probably Xing out when it comes to cash games. What are your thoughts on some of these guys in terms of tournament exposure?
So when I was crunching lineups earlier, just trying to get a feel of, I don't have anything set in stone yet, but obviously these guys are not populating too much in your builds. I mean, if you just look at overall pass out the lineups at Daytona, these are not the kind of guys that you want in your lineups. You want the guys starting from 20 and back. I think everyone knows that by now, but there is instances where you can target some of these drivers up front in tournaments, not in cash games, only in tournaments. Because a guy like Ryan Blaney at $10,000 starting in seventh, he's one of those guys that is exceptional at plate races. Team Penske tends to run very, very well here. Back in the past, when Brad Keselowski was with them, he's no longer with them, but Keselowski, Blaney, and Joe Logano, they're always up front, had some of the best average running positions out of everybody. So I really can't touch the front row. I will have 0% Kyle Larson, 0% Bowman. The numbers back that up. I'm hoping they're owned. I know people are starting to get on the idea where you don't play the drivers up front, but with Kyle Larson being such a big household name, you can get some real leverage just by completely Xing him out. But for as far as interest goes, Ryan Blaney is basically the only guy inside the top 10 that I would want to roster willingly.
Okay, so you're taking the basic approach that if it isn't Blaney, I'm not touching the rest of these drivers because is it because of the fear that they lose place differential or that they really don't have a dominator feel to them?
I mean, just looking at overall, like their potential for the amount of points they can score. I mean, a guy starting at 38th, if he finishes mid-pack, he's going to outscore any of these drivers that happen to like hold their position or move up a couple of spots. Anybody starting inside the top 10, they basically have to win the race to be optimal. We've seen instances in the past where if a guy in the like around the front row even still wins the race, they're still not in the optimal lineup. So the numbers just don't back it up. And if they're going to have any ownership, I just want to be way underweight and get my leverage there and be overweight on the guys starting in the back that will have high ownership.
Okay, this really does kind of bring us to an important point to circle back to, and that's really kind of basic roster construction for these types of races. Like after all of these years, because God, it feels like I've been playing NASCAR DFS for a decade, but I think it's really only been since maybe 2016. After all this time, I just have the natural assumption that when we get to Daytona or Talladega, that everybody kind of knows what the secret password is, and it's stack in the back, and you get let into the club, and we all just kind of hold hands and hope that our spray and pray approach for guys starting 20th or worse works out. That type of thinking doesn't always, seem to be true, and I guess you could call that a symptom of being a part of this ecosphere, the NASCAR DFS ecosphere, especially for those of us active on Twitter, where we assume that what we talk about the most is the way that the industry feels. But it does seem like there still are a lot of people that have this approach that, hey, it's 200 laps. I need a dominator. If this were like next week we're going to Fontana. If this were Fontana, then I would definitely want one or maybe even two dominators. So why don't I want a dominator in this race tomorrow?
So Daytona is a completely different track than normal. I mean, obviously at Talladega as its similar track component, but The way they race the Daytona, everyone is bunched up in a big pack, and fast laps are completely random. Everyone's drafting off each other. When I build my own projections, I completely remove fast laps because this is not something you can project. Yes, you can project fast laps led to a degree. Guy up front should let us stay up front for a little bit. Guys like Chase Elliott, Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano, Denny Hamlin, these guys are the typical lap leaders here at Daytona. But when the big one happens, because when they're all bunched up in a pack, drafting off each other, going nearly 200 miles per hour for 500 laps, or for 500 miles, all it takes is one slight error, one aggressive block, like we saw with Joey Logano in the dual race, that sends a car turning and it takes out half the field. And those 30 laps that the driver happened to lead early on, if they get wrecked out, they don't matter whatsoever. And that's why all the guys in the back end up getting all those positive place differential points. And the guy like Larson starting the front, or Bowman, if they wreck out, talking close to like -30, -40 DraftKings points. That's why stacking the back and not worrying about dominator points here is pretty important because of the lack of being able to project fast laps, which are more heavily weighted than laps led.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a point that, I know that we hammer and we hammer, and it's like beating a dead horse. Eventually, the majority of people are like, okay, get it. Stop playing guys up front. We get it. But I mean, it feels like this is a point that we have to constantly bring up so that when it's, 7, 8 o'clock tomorrow and people that played a Larson, a Bowman, a Keselowski, a Buescher, that ends, they don't even, let's just say they don't even wreck out. They just lose 10 place differential points, and they've got a 25th highest scoring driver, even though they survived the race, but they still fell back all that place differential and then those finishing position points. So it really is worth noting, guys, that this is a different race. It's a different track. What we're going to worry about next week in terms of laps led, fastest laps, put that on hold. This week, we're trying to fill two different scoring metrics. We're worried about place differential. We're worried about finishing position points. And, you can climb through the race sheets and you can look at the past optimals, and you can see like this isn't some crazy story that we're trying to weave here. You look at these past optimals, it is filled with these drivers that the majority of them start in the back. Now, you may say, well, if that's the case, then why are we even talking about these guys that are starting top 20? Because we have outliers, because we have guys that have the ability to start up front, gain some laps led points, and then hold their position. And if that's the case, then you're definitely going to need those guys, especially in such a top-heavy tournament like the Millionaire Maker, where you've got to have that upper percentile, like 0.01% lineup that's going to cash above everybody else if you're hoping to win that top prize. Before we go any further talking about drivers, do you have anything special that you'd like to add about building lineups for the Millionaire Maker?
So if you're using an optimizer like Fantasy Cruncher is offered with Awesemo, I have a certain setting I use every single plate race. I'll usually put in my settings, sort it by where they're starting, and you can finagle with it however you'd like. But I have it set for the driver starting 1st through 12th, 0 to 2 in my settings. And then from 13th to 24th, I have it from 0 to 3. And then from 25th on to the end, which is 40th this week, I have that set at 3 to 6 drivers. So if you're multi-entering, I think that's a very good way to approach that, just to keep your lineups in balance.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to go about it, especially if you have access to a lineup builder like Fantasy Cruncher. You guys have seen me tweeting about it relentlessly over the last couple of weeks, and it's because the site is offering such a good deal on the season-long pass right now. I mean, the deal has been active for a couple of weeks, and it ends tomorrow. And like I don't know how else to tell you this. If you want to save 69%, and I'm not going to make the stupid joke, if you want to save 69% on a season-long pass, and we're talking every Cup race, every Xfinity race, and every Trucks race, but before the duels, we were talking 96 slates, nearly 100 slates. And even if all you do is just play the Cup slates, we're still talking less than $2 a slate. When you play every single slate, now we're somewhere in the neighborhood of like 73 cents a slate. It's an amazing deal, but it runs out tomorrow. How do you take advantage of this? Well, you need to go to the site, and the promo is going to be green flag. Use that at checkout. That's going to save you the 69, 70%. Normally it's $230, which is still a fantastic deal, especially when you compare it to what else is available in the industry right now. But $70, that's a killer deal. That is going to take care of you through the rest of the season. That deal does run out tomorrow. So if you've been thinking about doing this, take advantage of it. Get in there. You'll have access to the rankings. You'll have access to ownership. You'll have access to the fantasy point projections. You'll have access to Discord. I mean, we're active every single race, and then most importantly, you'll have access to the top driver tool, which is Alex's own combination of practically every key stat that you would possibly need to build lineups, whether we're talking about multi-entry, single entry, 3 max, whatever that may be. So take advantage of that while you still can. Now we are going to move into drivers starting 11th through 20th. That is going to be Chase Elliott in 11th, Christopher Bell in 12th, Erik Jones in 13th, Martin Truex in 14th, Tyler Reddick in 15th, Bubba Wallace in 16th, Kurt Busch in 17th, Ricky Stenhouse in 18th, Ross Chastain in 19th, and finally Joey Logano in 20th. All right. So in this range, the player pool is opening up a little bit more for us. Out of all of these plays, drivers starting 11th through 20th, just on a pure your expectations for them in the race, who is probably your favorite driver out of these drivers?
Out of these guys, for me, it's definitely going to be Joey Logano, $9,800 starting in 20th. I think he's going to be a pretty popular play, but he's still kind of in that dead zone where he's not a huge place differential play. Like, yes, he is starting in 20th, which sounds great, but there's still 20 other drivers behind him. So it's not like he is risk proof here, but he also has a very high ceiling, because it would be not surprising whatsoever for Joey Logano to come out, win this race. Like we mentioned earlier with Ryan Blaney, he pretty much is the same play as Ryan Blaney, but he's starting 13 spots further back. So you have much more upside and a much safer floor. But Joey, the one problem with him is, though, he always tends to get caught up in the wrecks. We saw that with the dual race when everyone's racing clean for the most part. But what do you know? He's the guy that gets into the wall. I think that's probably like the least surprising thing that we saw in the duels. But as far as average running position goes, he's got the best in the field. He's very, very good here. He just has to stay clean. If he stays clean, good chance he leads like 20, 30 laps and top 5 contender.
Yeah, that has been the weirdest story with Logano, is that these Daytona races, especially the 500, it's like 4 straight races that he's led at least 20 laps. Like, regardless of where he starts, he always finds a way, makes a concerted effort to get to the front. I don't know if it's an aggressive part of his nature to want to dictate the pace of the race, but he makes an effort to get out there and he lead laps. But like you alluded to, he has just had sort of the worst luck when it comes to the end of the race. Before last summer's Daytona race, he had wrecked out in 3 straight Daytona races. I mean, when he's up there in front, you're probably counting the money, like, yeah, man, I'm getting place differential and lap sled points. But then by the end of the race, you're like, crap, he wrecked out, or he barely gained anything. He is a driver that I too like in this range. And like, if you wanted to go with a little higher upside in your cash plays and not just play all guys starting in the back, he is a driver that I would consider a cash play. A driver that I want to get your feelings on is the first driver that I mentioned in this range, and that's going to be Chase Elliott. He's 10,400 on DraftKings, 13,500 on FanDuel. What is his path to being a top 6 score tomorrow?
He's basically going to have to come out and do something similar like Joey Logano does, where he gets up front, leads some laps, and finishes like inside the top 3. Now he's probably going to have to win the race to be completely optimal, depending on how the rest of the race goes as far as carnage is. But Chase Elliott, outside of, like, when it comes to drivers inside the top 15, he is like my favorite tournament play out of all these guys. I do like him a little bit more than Ryan Blaney, just because he starts 4 spots further back. But Chase Elliott's, again, one of those guys that has one of the best running positions in the field here. He's typically up front. He's got 2 top 5s here the past few races, 3 top 10s, and average finish is actually not bad at 13.7. So he actually has been pretty decent at staying alive. Again, the starting position isn't great as far as DFS goes, but like we said, there's some outliers. He could be one of those guys that slips through the cracks and ends up being the optimal lineup.
Right. Yeah, he has a tougher path just simply because of where he's starting. But I mean, he's kind of like Logano. He's shown the propensity that he doesn't care. He'll move forward. And if we're just looking at practice is what practice is. And yes, I know the Fords keep finding a way to win practice, whatever that's worth to you. But when we look at those single lap qualifying efforts, I mean the Chevys were definitely strong. That's why Larson and Bowman are starting on the front row. So if we're going to take that as any sort of indication towards this Sunday, then yeah, I do think that Elliot is a strong play. The next driver that I want to look at, and it's simply because it seems like him in super speedway races, they mix like oil and water, and that's Martin Truex Jr.
Right.
starting 14th at 8,800 on DraftKings, 9,000 on FanDuel. Is there a path for you in we're not going to talk about 20 max lineups because I don't think it's conceivable that you have Truex unless he's like a 5% play. But in 150 max builds, how would you feel about rostering Truex, who I don't want to say guaranteed because nothing's guaranteed in NASCAR, but it almost seems like a certainty that this man will finish with negative place differential.
And you're right about that. He's averaging last 6 Daytona races, negative 14 spots lost. Like he has been absolutely terrible with these. I mean, a lot of that is due to bad luck getting caught in wrecks, but sometimes guys are just magnets for it. Averaging less than 10 DraftKings points per race here, average finish around 25th place. Looking at some of the dummy builds and some of the sims I've been running, Truex is really not popping up too much for me. If we're talking like less than 10%, and that's kind of low for a guy starting in 14th. Like usually they'll pop up maybe a little bit more than that, but the way Truex has been in his crash factor that he's just been like a magnet for, like I said, he's just not a guy that's really finding my lineups too often. I don't hate him starting in 14th. That's a little bit of PD upside, kind of similar like Chase Elliott, but Chase Elliott is also a much better plate racer than Martin Truex, which is something you got to factor in as well.
Yeah, and if you're trying to not be agnostic to the names, like you're just purely saying, okay, I'm just looking at guys with place differential, and you're wondering about these drivers in the teens. Like there's no reason why Truex should be quote unquote as bad as he is, but I mean it has been definitely a recent track record where he works himself backwards, and it's odd because I still vividly remember the Daytona 500 when he was still racing for Furniture Row, when he drag raced Denny Hamlin to the line and nearly beat him, and it seems like ever since then the only time I can really think of him popping off was a summer Daytona race where he finished second to Erik Jones. Everything ever since that has seemed like it's been bad news bears.
Exactly. And it's probably going to lead to some lower ownership. So if you want to take some stabs on him in tournaments just to gain a little bit of leverage, like he's not an absolutely awful play for where he's starting, but on paper, it just doesn't look that great if you're looking at those numbers.
Yeah. The next driver that I want to bring up, and he's a guy that, even though he's starting a little bit further up the grid than we would like, it is our most recent super speedway winner, and that's going to be Bubba Wallace starting 16th. He's kind of in this weird range for people, I believe, where you see the place differential upside, but he still has more positions that he can lose than he can actually gain. How are you feeling about Bubba in tournament lineups tomorrow?
I actually really like Bubba. I actually wrote him up in the tournament article that I posted over on Awesemo yesterday, but he's the guy that I think is going to slip through the cracks. Like I know pricing doesn't matter, but when you see Bubba Wallace above 8K, just doesn't really make it feel that great, but he's actually a pretty solid plate racer. The past 2 races at them, finished first and second. One, got rain shortened, albeit, but he was still running pretty well. Also has another 5th place finish mixed in there. Like the guy is actually not that bad at them. 5 out of the past 6 Daytonas inside the top 20, starting 16th. If he can, work with his Jordan teammate, Kurt Busch, maybe get in with the owner, Denny Hamlin. And we know Denny Hamlin, one of the best drivers at Daytona. So he definitely has some things working in his favor for sure. And that 16 starting spot, it's like a big dead zone where people don't want to touch.
Yeah. Speaking of Hamlin, I want to get to Sean Preston, who left us a super chat. Thank you, sir, for that. He says, Chris, you strictly with Awesemo now? He says, how do you like Hamlin, and talk me out of Almirola, please? So we will get into both of these guys when we get into the 30 range. But yeah, all I can say right now in regards to Sean is both of these guys, the ownership is going to be absolutely crazy on these guys. So when we get to the 30 range, Sean, we will directly address your super chat, and thank you once again for that. Chris, before we get out of this price range, there are a few more kind of higher upside guys that I want you to talk to me about. The first is going to be your favorite, my favorite, everyone's favorite, Ricky Stenhouse. Yesterday, I was talking with a friend of mine, and he asked me, "Okay, give me a mid-tier selection that could possibly win this race." And the first guy I thought of was Ricky. I mean, Ricky's attitude here at these super speedway races has always been either I'm finishing first or I'm wrecking out in the process. Are you still feeling kind of that same way about Ricky that I am?
Yeah, and I've actually talked about him a lot this week. I have him on the Awesemo article with Bubba Wallace as being a mid-range GPP play. It's just he's the perfect stereotypical plate race GPP play, starting right in the middle of the pack where no one wants to touch. Ricky Stenhouse is known for being a guy that wrecks a lot. No one wants to play that. I think I already mentioned where he's starting, but the price tag kind of up there, $8,000, not really a big deal or anything. But if you're looking at the numbers of plate races, he typically has one of the best average running positions. He's a guy that can work his way to the front, and he has a legit chance of winning these races. Most tracks, not really the case for Ricky, but he's actually pretty darn good here. The problem is, like you said, wreckers or checkers, which is a very aggressive. So he's like the prototypical, stereotypical plate racer. You got to be careful with him. He's not a guy you go all the way in on, but he's definitely a guy you want to take some stabs at because he could easily be in the optimal lineup and potentially win this race.
Right. The final guy that I want to talk about in this range before we get out of this semi-comfortable GPP range is going to be Erik Jones. On Thursday, I thought he was gonna for sure fall back. Like I thought, the news coming out of the Petty GMS garage was we cannot afford to lose this car. If we do, it's going to be trouble. And that made sense to me that, hey, let's fall back, let's not get racy. Well, what did Erik Jones do? I believe he finished sixth in his duel. Now he starts 13th at $6,000 on DraftKings and $5,500 on FanDuel. Like, I understand the path is tough for him, but this is one of those off the wall tournament plays that people might possibly need to consider in order to find pivots, because his pivots are ultimately going to be the cheaper guys with more place differential. So I know he's not a guy that most people are going to be clicking on, but make the case for Erik Jones as a one-off guy in this starting range.
And the first thing I will say is that I don't think we should view Erik Jones as a $6,000 plate racer. He's much better than that. I don't think he should be cheaper than a guy like Greg Biffle. I don't think he should be just above Dino Suarez. I think they mispriced. And I think if you viewed him around $7,000, you'd have a better light on him. But he's actually pretty good at plate races. Past two, 9th, 11th. He has a second place finish a couple seasons ago in Talladega. He also has 3 top 5s the past several plate races. I don't mind Erik Jones here. He's actually pretty good at these races. And yes, he's no longer with Joe Gibbs, but that's not going to really matter much at a track like this. Don't worry too much about equipment. So for Erik Jones to be in the optimal, the problem is all the guys priced around him are massive PD plays. So for him to outscore them, they're just going to have to probably be not as much carnage as we'd want. So the rest of our lineups might be hurting, but there is a chance Erik Jones could sneak in the optimal lineup, but he's definitely going to have to get inside that top 5.
Yeah, and you brought up an awesome point that I want to capitalize on. The lineups that you build, like, they have to tell a story. Like, if you're playing Erik Jones in lieu of one of these drivers at a similar price point that has much more place differential, you're doing so possibly with the idea that either this race doesn't get quite as chaotic as we're expecting. Like, it doesn't turn into the wreck fest. It could possibly just be a single file, boring race. And people can think back to Daytona 500s in the past that we've seen where the drivers basically, they just lined up single file and they raced that way the entire race before they finally got to the end. And I mean, from what I've seen in the duels, that is definitely a possibility. And if that's the scenario, then that makes sense for Erik Jones being in a lineup. So be mindful of that. Be cognizant of that when you're building lineups. It's not just throwing a pool of drivers together that that fit the criteria that we're at. When you are selecting, especially one of these drivers that are up here in the higher end, you are telling yourself the story that these guys are necessarily going to finish high, and that you're playing them over someone who's similarly priced because they don't get access to that place differential. Before we go any further, move into the drivers into the second half of the field, we need to talk about our show sponsor today, and that is Jock Market. Jock Market is fantasy sports, like kind of like it's a stock exchange for fantasy sports, is a way to think about it. Make money every minute, every second, every hour, just like you would in the regular market. You can buy and sell share of players in real time for real money. Use our exclusive code Awesemo, get $100 bonus up to your first deposit. And you know what the fun thing is? They are starting NASCAR tomorrow. In fact, I was looking around the lobby, and they're already offering a $2,500 free roll for tomorrow. So you can dip your toes into the Jock Market waters and play around on this website. It's a very interesting, different take on daily fantasy. I mean, we've all been playing salary cap for years. You've been playing player props turned into fantasy. Well, now we have Jock Market offering basically the stock exchange of DFS. Use pregame IPO to pick up shares of your favorite players. You can buy, you can sell, you can hold during the race tomorrow. First market guarantee. This is the great thing. Jock Market will refund any losses in your first NFL or NBA market up to $100. And furthermore, check out our free Jock Market IPO projections to help you beat the market. Check out that. Use the promo code, double up your money, and remember, if things don't go your way with what your selections are with your first NBA market picks, you get that money refunded. I mean, that is a heck of a deal that you have to take advantage of. So now we're going to delve into the drivers that are going to be seeing more and more ownership. This is going to be drivers starting 21st through 30th. 21st, we've got Daniel Suarez. 22nd, we've got Kevin Harvick. 23rd, we've got William Byron. We've got Lajoie in 24th, Justin Haley in 25th, Ty Dillon in 26th, Landon Cassil in 27th, Greg Biffle in 28th, Todd Gilland in 29th, and finally, welcome to Chalk City, population Dennis Allen Hamlin starting in 30th. All right, let's get back to Sean's question. It's hard to make the case against this guy. Just spill your heart on the floor. How are you feeling about Hamlin? And I don't even care about ownership at this point. Just what are your feelings on Hamlin as far as what his ceiling is, what his floor is, what he's actually capable of? Personally, what you think about your exposure for him tomorrow in your lineups?
So just not even thinking about ownership. I mean, obviously we can get wrapped up in high ownership plays and bad in tournaments, but just completely disregarding that. Hamlin's going to be the highest owned driver. He's going to be the highest projected driver in pretty much any projection system format. I mean, if it's not, you got some issues on there. But he has just been a phenomenal Daytona driver. I mean, 2 wins the past several races, 4 top 5s, the most laps led per race, one of the best running positions, the best average finish behind Justin Haley, who's got a smaller sample size. But the guy's just been an absolute machine here, starting all the way back in 30th. Some guys just have the it factor at a track like this. Yes, a lot of luck is based on doing well at Daytona or Talladega, but when there's just a constant recurring theme of a driver being good at these types of tracks, there's several other ones that we talked about. But Denny Hamlin, I mean, he's right up there with him. I know like a couple of seasons ago, when we visited 4 plate races, he had an average finish of 2.4. Like that is basically unheard of. Now, again, a little bit lucky avoiding the wrecks, but it's just hard to completely avoid him. And if you're just looking at some of his potential upside, so Hamlin's starting all the way in 30. If he happened to grab a 6th place finish, we're talking 62 points. If he won the race, 74 points, and that's disregarding any potential laps led or anything like that. So his ceiling is extremely high, and the floor is pretty high too.
Yeah, I mean, it outside of ownership, like it is extremely hard to tell yourself a story why Hamlin is a bad play tomorrow. Like he legitimately offers you everything that you're looking for in a DFS play tomorrow.
Right. And I mean, again, the only downside is, or I guess maybe the upside to fading him in tournaments is that he's going to be high owned and everybody and anybody has an equal chance of wrecking. He's not untouchable. He can easily get caught up in someone else's mess. Might not be his fault, but if Logano happens to turn a guy and Hamlin gets caught into it, you're going to be looking real good in tournaments. So there's two ways to look at the story here, but on paper, he's a fantastic play.
Right. All right. To help the people out in chat, because I know there's some confusion, let me just do this for the next 10 minutes and maybe like, oh my God, it's Phil. I thought that was him. Yes. Let's get to another question. This comes from Chandler. Chandler wants you to break down for him. Let's see here. He was talking about basically give me the breakdown of Logano versus Byron. Like, who do you think has the higher upside in tournaments?
So I personally like Logano just straight up in terms of raw points goes. Now in tournaments, I kind of like pivoting to William Byron. I mentioned that in the Awesemo article I wrote as far as tournament strategy goes, because Logano's going to be chalky. Everyone knows to play Joey at Super Speedway, especially Daytona. I remember one year, I think Joey Logano was like on the pole or starting into the top 5, and he was around 30% of. So starting back in 20th, he's going to have some ownership. But people aren't going to want to completely just load up on those guys, because if you're playing Logano, you're probably playing Hamlin, you're playing some other guys. You can't afford everybody. So I do like to pivot to William Byron. He's actually a pretty good plate racer when he's not wrecking. The problem is he does wreck a lot. Him and the Hendrick cars, maybe besides Chase Elliott, just are constant wreck magnets. But when he's not wrecking, the past 6 races, I believe he has 3 wrecks, but the ones he didn't, it's actually not that bad. We're talking a 2nd place finish, a 4th place finish, and a win at Daytona back in 2020.
Yeah. I mean, if it's a 1v1 scenario that where the guys are similarly priced, like let's just do this mental exercise. You are building a single entry lineup in one of the big, like $100 plus entries, and you are left with the decision of Logano versus Byron. Which way are you going?
Yeah, so if I have like a chalky lineup already, I'm getting to Byron. If I have a non-chalky lineup, I think getting the Joey just to balance that out. But you don't need to get completely contrarian in your entire lineup. I think some people get caught up into being too contrarian. Just taking a couple of pivots is usually the best way to go about it instead of just going completely off the wall.
Yeah, I like that idea. And that's a fantastic way of looking at it, is that if you understand that the rest of your lineup is starting to look pretty stinking chalky, with what you do with that last driver in can make a world of difference in finding differentiation, and pivoting to Byron in that scenario versus Logano does make a lot of sense. Let's talk about some of these drivers kind of sandwiched in between the Loganos, the Byrons, and in between Hamlins. These are drivers that have much longer odds. Like a bunch of these guys are sitting in that 100-1 betting odds over on certain books. They're all kind of similarly priced, whether you're looking at DraftKings or FanDuel. And I'm talking about the likes of Corey Lajoie. Justin Haley's a little priced up, but I think that DraftKings is giving him a price increase because of that summer Daytona win from a couple of years ago. Plus, he hasn't raced all that often in the Cup Series in these super speedway races, but when he does, he generally finds his way to the front. I mean, you were talking about it; it's a short sample size, but that average finish of 7th compared to his starting position around 32nd. I mean, that's kind of preposterous for a short sample. Then you've got Todd Gilland starting 26th at 5,200. You've got Cassil driving the 77 for Spire at 5,600. And then you got the Biff. The Biff is back making a spot start for this. I can't remember if it's like FDNY or New York Racing, if it's some combination. It sounds like some firefighters or some policemen from New York started a racing team. And then we've got young Todd Gilland, who's, coming up from the Truck Series, completely skipping the Xfinity Series and making his first actual Cup start here at Daytona. Out of all of these guys, they're all kind of similar to me. Like they all kind of have the same ceiling, and I guess probably the same floor in terms of what they're capable of. Out of these drivers starting 24th through 29th, is there one driver that's kind of catching your eye more than the others?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple. I do want to mention I love this range in tournaments because everyone's playing the guys below them in the 30s. So people are going to naturally just skip over these guys. So these are great tournament plays. But the two I like here, Corey Lajoie and Todd Gilland, they are just excellent at getting good finishes at Daytona. I'm not sure what it is. Their strategy just happens to work out, and it's something they've been consistently doing. Like looking at the average DraftKings points scored per race here, Cody Ware is just under 50, and Ty Dillon is also just over 40. Like average finish around 13.2 and average finish of 15.5 for Ty Dillon. Like these guys just know how to get good finishes, and they know how to avoid the carnage. And I like that. Now they're starting a little bit high up, a little bit higher than you'd like, starting in 24th and 26th. But like I said, that's why I love them in tournaments, because guys like Daniel Hemrick, David Reagan, Kaz Grala. I probably shouldn't put Hemrick in that group, but guys like David Reagan, Kaz Grala, and those kind of guys, they seem a little bit safer, which they'll have some decent ownership. But even though they are starting a little bit further up, I just feel like Corey LaJoie and Ty Dillon definitely have more upside.
Yeah. I always have a soft spot for Corey LaJoie when it comes to these super speedway races. He always seems to try to find a way to the front. His average finish always looks pretty good. We're talking about 5 top 20 finishes in his last 6 starts here. And if people will go back to that summer Daytona race, like he was a lap within overtaking Ryan Blaney potentially and winning that race and punching his ticket to the playoffs, but then the chaos ensued behind him and he ended up falling back. I think he finished his ninth and like 19th that night. But always loved LaJoie, and I bet because he's starting 24th, like he's the highest starting of all of these guys that are kind of all thought about pretty similar. I think that you're going to be able to get an ownership discount on him, but that's relative compared to what people's attitudes are towards just stacking everybody in the back tomorrow. We addressed Biffle earlier, but I keep looking back at these betting odds and I don't know what to make of it. On DraftKings Sportsbook, he's 40-1. At BetMGM, he's 50-1. That is, that's basically Ross Chastain range. That's Justin Haley range. Do you see this same kind of upside with Biffle in this vehicle?
No, especially not compared to the guys that you mentioned. I mean, Ross Chastain, the one car, a lot more upside. Justin Haley's an excellent plate racer. We've seen that in the Xfinity Series, and Kaulig tends to run pretty well with these plate races. So I do disagree with that a lot. And I'm actually not a huge fan of Biffle here. Like starting 28th, it's fine. Like he wasn't terrible in the duel, but I'm really not that in on him starting in 20th. I'd much rather play the guys that we already mentioned. I'd rather play Landon Cassil, and I'd probably rather play Todd Gilland as well.
Yeah, and I think that's just a general rule for me as well. When I think about Biffle, yeah, like I remember I was looking at his Daytona history, and this is like I think his rookie season was 2003 or 2004, all the way up until 2018 or 19 when he retired. And out of all those Daytona races, he only had 3 did not finishes. Like he had a pretty solid bet of ending this race. But I mean, that was Roush equipment, regardless of whatever you want to say about Roush at that towards the latter years. But we really just don't know what to expect out of this vehicle. And I don't want to say that it's going to have some weird mechanical issues or what have you. But the thing that I worry about, especially with this Gen 7 car, and it's been shown pretty strongly through the practices and through the dual races, is that if you're the last car at the end of the line, like you will lose the pack. Like in yesterday's truck race, Kurt Busch was talking about like with this new car, you cannot side draft whatsoever. But if you've got a buddy, you can do a tandem and you can move your way forward. Well, one of the weird things about this is at the end of these trains, at the end of these lines, if you're the last guy on there, if you don't have the horsepower to keep up, you will lose the draft. And if you've got a punt play that is losing laps and not able to pick up position outside of wrecks happening, that is really going to limit your upside in tournaments. Before we get into the final range, I want to give everybody some last reminders. If you're not already doing so, get on the Twitter machine and follow me at RaceSheetsDFS. If you're not already doing so, you need to get on Twitter and follow Chris Pinnell at ChrisPinnell16. And finally, you need to follow Awesemo's own NASCAR dedicated Twitter channel, which is going to be at Awesemo NASCAR, where the latest news, information, and articles from our team of writers here at Awesemo will be shared. So let's get into our final group. This is the driver starting 31st through 40th. That is going to include Cole Custer, who everybody in chat wants to hear your opinion on. Apparently, Cole is going to be a popular driver tomorrow. We've got Cody Ware starting 32nd, Daniel Hemrick in 33rd, David Ragan in 34th, Kaz Grala in 35th, Austin Dillon in 36th, BJ McLeod in 37th, Eric Almirola in 38th, Noah Gragson in 39th, and Jacques Villeneuve in 40th. So we've already discussed Sean's question about Denny. Let's get into Erik. Sean basically is saying, can you talk me out of playing Eric Almirola because this almost looks like too easy of a play?
The only way I could talk you out of Erik Almirola is give you my personal experience of rostering him like a few seasons ago when Austin Dillon wrecked him out of winning the race at the very end because Almirola was starting in the back. I had like 100% Almirola in that race. I was already capped my monies. Dillon turned him, and then my monies went bye-bye. So that's maybe the only reason I could tell you to maybe get off him a little bit. But he's a good play. For playing cash games, don't overthink it. Tournaments, yeah, I'm still playing. Don't fade him. Because I mean, you can be underweight and not completely fade a guy. But these guys are fantastic plays. Like Erik Almirola starting in 38th, he can lose you 2 spots. Austin Dillon starting in 36th. The guy's a good plate racer. Already mentioned he's a former Daytona 500 champ. Actually, just pretty solid overall at Daytona. 4 top 20s the past 6 races here. So the only reason you were getting away from them is if you already have a super chalky lineup and you need some pivots, because those are definitely not ways to get different by rostering those guys.
Right. The next guy that we're getting questioned about is a guy that has won a couple of super speedway races himself, and that is David Ragan starting 34th. The last couple of years, Ragan has been making kind of one-off starts for his former team, Front Row Motorsports, but this year he is taking the helms of the 15 for Rick Ware. Like, I don't know quite what to make of it. It looks like Rick Ware has basically decided that less is more. We're going to put more focus on Cody, and that the 15 may be turned into like an all-star ride where I can get older drivers with higher accolades who can bring in their own sponsorship to take over this vehicle. So it looks like that's what Ragan's doing this week. What are your feelings on the wily veteran David Ragan?
The only reason I'm playing him is just because he's starting in the back. And, you know, guys that have a lot of experience here know they can just ride around the back and get a good finish, which I don't think David Ragan's going to come out here and try to win the race. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be able to do that. So if he can just ride around the back, avoid some wrecks, if he gets you a top 25, you'll be pretty happy starting in 34th, and he's dirt cheap as well.
Yeah. Out of all of these guys that we've been talking about, is there one driver in this range that you're limiting exposure to in tournaments? Like out of these drivers, who is probably the driver that's going to end up the least in your tournament lineups?
So right now, I'm having a hard time getting to the likes of guys like Cody Ware starting in 32nd, and then Billy as well, just because I'm not sure how much I can trust Billy, especially with guys losing the draft. And we saw his car not even starting at the beginning of the one duel race. That can be some concerns right off the bat. So even though he is starting in 40th, it's appealing. And in some of my sims, he is popping up because, again, there's a wreck early on. He's not completely dead in the water yet. He's going to move up, and he can't lose you any points. But I do worry about the potential ceiling as far as being in the optimal lineup goes.
Yeah, and I saw this morning before the Xfinity qualifying got going that they are going to have to swap engines overnight tomorrow, and then of course that's going to send him to the back. But I mean, he was already at the tail end anyway. So if you were looking for a reason to not play Jock, that engine swap for a brand new team trying to do one of their few one-off races this year, that could potentially be something to be wary of. It's almost like Garrett Cope last year. There was no scenario where I wanted to play Garrett Cope. He will always be the man who won the Daytona 500 because a Seabird hit Dale Earnhardt's car, and forever. Garrett Cope will always be on my X out list, and that worked out last year. And that may be the same thing with this poor Villeneuve Hesman's team. Before we close out, remind everybody, give us a like, give us a subscribe, help us fight the algorithm so that these shows can continue to make their way to your feed. Remember, as long as you're liking and subscribing, you're going to see the various shows, our DFS offers, our giveaways, and much more. Once you subscribe, hit that notification button to get alerts when our shows go live. Don't forget, people, that me and Chris will be back tomorrow with Jason Floyd for Live Before Lock, answering all of your lineup questions, whatever else you may be wondering about, giving you late breaking news that if we see any more people that are having to go to the back for technical inspection or what have you. Don't forget to go to the promos page where you can take advantage of the season-long pass discount, save 70%, just pay $70 now instead of the $230, which that price will go back up to on Monday. As we close out this show, Chris, I want to open up the floor to you. Do you have any closing thoughts, any closing lineup construction thoughts for us before we go away?
And make sure to wait until the end of the race to send us our mean tweets, because if there's no wreck early on, this happens every single year. You're probably going to be losing money for the majority of this race if there's no wreck. But when the big one happens, it'll be looking good, and then you can wait till after to send your remarks.
Yeah, that's basically it. And I want to tell people, like, last night in the trucks race, like I kept preaching there was chaos. There's going to be chaos. And through the first segment, it was clean. And then in the second segment, it was clean. And then finally, before the end of the race, we had the big one, and it took out, it didn't take out, but it impacted half of the field. So just because through 150 laps we're sitting pretty, don't think that within those last 40 minutes we don't get some crazy cautions, and that it really does impact the end of this race. For Chris and for Mike behind the glass, I want to thank every one of you guys for joining us. It's been a pleasure hosting this show. Hopefully, I get to see you guys further on in the future as a host, taking your questions in these strategy shows. For everyone here at Awesemo, thank you for joining us, and everybody have a great day.